In Texas, the primary grounds for divorce is no fault, meaning we just don't want to be married anymore. And that is the standard ground for divorce. You don't have to have a reason. Some other grounds include adultery and cruel treatment. So cruel treatment is often alleged in a divorce petition as well, and that can include a domestic violence situation, actual physical violence, but also can include things like just emotional abuse, mental and emotional issues. It can also include things like, maybe your spouse is a drunk and that has caused you stress and emotional turmoil as a result of their behavior. So those are some of the primary grounds. Adultery is something that everybody thinks is a great grounds for divorce, and that it's going to get them something more than just a reasonable split. But that would not be the case. You could certainly claim that your spouse has cheated on you and that's the reason you want to get a divorce, but it's not going to generally get you more of the community estate than what you would get otherwise. Courts look at adultery as if that's an issue between the spouses. And usually they believe that if there's been cheating involved, there was a problem in the marriage before the cheating occurred. So it's not really that the cheating was the cause of the divorce. The marriage was already over before the cheating started. The time that you're going to get something more when someone has cheated is if that person has spent money on their girlfriend or boyfriend, a lot of money, not just dinners, not just flowers, but maybe they were supporting them, had an apartment, took them on some extensive vacations. That is stealing from the community estate, and that will get you something in a divorce. But the simple fact that someone has cheated is not necessarily going to get you more. So when you're getting a divorce in Texas, we look at the entire universe of all of your assets and your liabilities to come up with a complete view of what your entire estate looks like. Once we do that, we are going to evaluate how best to divide that up. A lot of people think, well, it's a 50-50 straight down the middle, but that's not necessarily the case. There's no rule that says it has to be exactly 50-50, although a lot of divorces end up with essentially a 50-50 split. But that also doesn't mean that you get half of everything. You may need more cash. Your spouse may want to keep the retirement. You'll have to decide, is anybody keeping the house, or are we going to sell it and take the proceeds from that and then divide those? We look at the entire universe, figure out kind of where we want to end up as a split that is reasonable for both parties, given the needs that each person has, and then try to work it in a way that is beneficial for both. So again, one person may keep the house, the other may keep the retirement, maybe we divide up the retirement, but in the end, we're looking at the bottom line to determine, is this a good split? Does this make sense for both parties? And is it fair and equitable? If you had assets before you got married, say you were working and had a retirement, maybe you bought a house before you got married, those are considered separate property. So once you're married, that stays separate property, even if your spouse has contributed, say, to the mortgage of a house that you bought before you got married. They may have a right to a reimbursement for some of the money that they paid towards that house, but it's still your house. So separate property doesn't get divided in a divorce. We confirm that. The court will determine what is separate property, or you'll do that by agreement, and you keep that. Now, that can affect whether or how much spousal maintenance you may get if you're entitled to spousal maintenance, but it's not going to affect the property division. Sometimes when people have had assets before they got married, or say you got an inheritance while you were married, maybe a family member died and they left you some money, when you put that in a community account and you use that separate property inheritance to pay off community bills, or buy things for the marriage. Maybe you bought a pool to be installed in your house. Now you've commingled those assets. That can cause problems in identifying that property that was yours, that was your separate property. So now it's commingled in with your community assets, and sometimes it can be very difficult to prove that that was separate property. The other risk you run into is that if you use that separate property that was given to you, that was your property, that was not part of the marital estate, if you use that for the benefit of the marriage, you can be seen to have given that as a gift. And now you can't get it back as your separate property. So just be very careful if you gain an inheritance, if you have property before you got married, make sure that you keep what's separate, and don't commingle it. A lot of women are concerned when they're going through divorce because they haven't worked throughout their marriage, and maybe they don't have any education that would enable them to get a job after a long-term marriage ends that could support themselves. And many women ask us about spousal maintenance, and are they going to get spousal maintenance and how much? In Texas, spousal maintenance is extremely limited. It's really a very specific award that is made when you really cannot support yourself in any way. That makes it really difficult to prove that you're entitled to spousal maintenance. Even if you haven't worked, even if you can't get a job that would pay you a good salary that would support a household. A court's going to look at, are you getting child support? How much are you getting? Can you get a job of any sort? And if so, how much is that going to provide you an income? They're also going to look at the assets that you get in the divorce. So if you get a house and if you get a bunch of retirement or any assets at all, the judge will assume that you could sell those assets. You could use those assets to live on. Is that fair? I don't think so, but that's the way our law is. And so you really need to think about and plan with your lawyer if you believe that you need spousal maintenance to support yourself down the road. You want to create a strategy for trying to negotiate spousal maintenance, or in my mind, the best way to handle it is to negotiate for more of the community estate so that you have funds in hand. You have assets that you can control and invest or do what you need to do with to support yourself. Because if you're relying on someone else to pay you money, X amount, month after month for years down the road, what happens if they lose their job, if they die? You can't guarantee that that money is always going to be there. You are much better off in having money in hand or assets in hand that you can convert and use for your own use. But the key is to have a plan, a strategy. If you're going to ask for spousal maintenance, which I believe everyone who is entitled, who has been married 10 years, who's been the victim of domestic violence, or who is disabled, should ask for it and then try to negotiate a plan for either getting it or getting something in to replace that spousal maintenance, but have a plan. If you have children while getting divorced, that adds a whole extra level of complexity. So not only are you dividing your assets and liabilities, but now you are planning out your children's lives, at least while they are children, until they are 18 and have graduated from high school. You will continue to be in connection with your ex-spouse, and you have to deal with them. If you have children, you're going to be connected with that ex-spouse until your kids are 18 and graduated from high school. In reality, you're really going to be connected to them for life, but you don't have to deal with them as much after the kids have graduated from high school. Up until that point, you have to figure out what a possession schedule is and co-parent with that parent about your kids' daily lives. What's going to happen when they're in high school and they're driving? What happens when they go to prom? All of these things need to be managed, and the parents need to work together to make the kids' life easier so that they are not affected by the divorce. Only you are. If you have any questions about divorce, reach out to our team at DeFord Law Firm.